Today we're out here in the rain taking a look at the all-new Lexus UX crossover. This is the smallest Lexus crossover on sale in the US, and it has a really tough job ahead of it because this segment has become a lot more competitive lately. We have a ton of brand new models like the Volvo XC40 and a brand new Range Rover Evoque, and then we have some existing models that are very competitive like the BMW X1 as well. In this segment, the main proposition for the Lexus UX is of course Lexus reliability, but also fuel economy and standard active safety. And lucky me, the hail has started. Hopefully it's dry and warm where you are watching this right now. Up front we have LED headlamps with the distinctive Lexus swoosh going on right there. We have fog lamps at the bottom of the grille, and the model we're looking at today is the Hybrid F Sport trim. So this is the most fuel efficient version of the UX, and it has the sportiest grille design up front. One of the main selling propositions for modern Lexus vehicles is that Lexus is including all of their latest active safety systems standard in every trim on most of their models, or actually all of their models now for 2019. That includes radar adaptive cruise control, pre-collision autonomous warning and braking, lane keeping assistance, etc. These are features that are optional even on luxury brands that have safety in mind, like Mercedes-Benz and of course Volvo. At 177 inches long, the Lexus UX is on the long side of this particular segment, but this is still considered a subcompact crossover. So this is designed to compete with the XC40, X1, X2, Q3, etc. In terms of overall dimensions, this actually slots almost exactly between something like the brand new Audi Q3 and the larger Lexus NX. In a way, by giving us the UX, Lexus has helped clarify their lineup a little bit, because for some reason a lot of folks out there have assumed that the Lexus NX was the competitor to the BMW X1, and that's not the case. The BMW X1 competes with this, the BMW X3 competes with the NX, and the Lexus RX really has no natural corollary in most of the luxury lineups. Out back, we have tail lamps that mimic the swoosh that we have on the front lamp modules. These are LED tail lamps, but they're not full LEDs. They're combination elements, so we do have some incandescent portions right down there. Then we have a strong bar that connects those two lamp modules together. We are driving, again, the hybrid model, so we have an H right here. Then we have a slightly different bumper arrangement down at the bottom. Since we're also driving the Hybrid F Sport, instead of chrome, we get these sort of dark chrome features. One thing that you'll definitely notice versus some of the competition is the overall cargo area height. The cargo area starts a little bit higher off the ground than many of its direct competitors. The big difference between the UX and basically every other entry in this segment can be found underneath the hood, because we don't find a turbocharged engine under here like we find in almost every other entry. Things start out with a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine actually borrowed from the Toyota Corolla. It produces 169 horsepower and 151 pound-feet of torque and sends power to the front wheels only via basically the same CVT that we find in that Corolla as well, although it will imitate a 10-speed automatic transmission. At the moment, that makes this the least powerful entry in this segment in America, but it does also make it one of the most fuel efficient at 33 miles per gallon combined. If you want even better fuel economy or better performance, then we choose this model right here, which is the hybrid system. It uses a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine as well, but thanks to the added hybrid system, it bumps the power up to 181 horsepower and it adds an electric motor in the rear. So if you want all-wheel drive, this is the version of the UX that you buy. Thanks to the electric motors, fuel economy goes all the way up to 39 miles per gallon, easily besting basically everybody else in this particular segment. It's also worth noting that at the moment, this is the only hybrid in this segment, although we do expect to see hybrids and plug-in hybrids from the Europeans very soon. The electric all-wheel drive system operates basically the same way that it does in the Lexus NX and the Lexus RX. There's an electric motor back here, and that means that there is no mechanical connection to the engine up front. All we get is electrons going to the rear and powering that rear electric motor. That means that the UX, like the NX and RX hybrids, can never send all of engine power to the rear, or even really a majority of engine power to the rear axle. In general terms, this all-wheel drive system is going to be a little bit less capable than a mechanical all-wheel drive system that we would find in another Lexus model or in some of the competition, but it is definitely far more capable than the front-wheel drive Lexus UX. And it's worth noting that the power imbalance is less pronounced in the UX. That's because the overall system horsepower is a little bit lower than we find in the NX or the RX hybrids, and the result is that we get a greater balance of power able to go to the rear wheels. When it comes to front seat comfort, I'm going to give these seats 8 out of 10 points. These are more comfortable than the average mainstream subcompact crossover, but I did find these a little bit less comfortable and most notably less adjustable than some of the luxury entries like the Volvo XC40, the BMW, and of course the new Range Rover Evoque as well. We don't have things like 4-way adjustable lumbar support, inflatable side bolsters, or extending thigh cushions. You will find those in some of the competition, but we do have a 4-way electric adjustable tilt telescopic steering column. It's also worth noting that the passenger seat does not have the same range of motion as the driver's seat. Hopping into the back seats, I'm going to have to drop the score down to 6 out of 10 points. Although the UX is on the long side for this segment, it's not quite as upright, not quite as square as many of the entries, and that results in a little bit less interior practicality. As you see on the side of your screen, overall combined legroom falls notably below the BMW, the Mercedes, the Jaguar, etc. That's really noticeable. If I were to try and move over to the right side of the vehicle, this front seat is all the way back in its track, suitable for a 6'5" person, and I really can't fit over there. Now, headroom is a little bit better than I had expected. Sitting even here in the middle seat, my hair is just barely brushing the ceiling. On the bright side, overall passenger room really doesn't change whether you get the hybrid or the non-hybrid, but we do see a reduction in the cargo room. If you choose the non-hybrid model, then we get 21.7 cubic feet of storage space back here. Choosing the hybrid drops that down to 17.1 because the battery is actually living right here underneath this cargo area. You'll notice the difference mainly in the depth of the cargo area. It doesn't change the length at all there or the width of this overall area. Now, I was only able to fit 3 24-inch roller bags back here, and that really wouldn't change whether you got the hybrid or the non-hybrid. It's just the way the cargo area is shaped overall. The overall cargo hatch back here is shaped a little bit like your average hatchback in America right now, with a pretty aggressive slant and not really a flat area in the back. So even though the rear end appears to have sort of a flat area on it, that's actually just in the overall lid right there. It doesn't translate to the shape of the opening at all. As we look around this interior, keep in mind that we are in the hybrid F Sport trim. We have a pretty standard sized moonroof right there for the driver and front passenger. And then we have height adjustable shoulder belts and 2-way adjustable headrests. These headrests have the F Sport emblem embossed right there in the center. The upholstery in this vehicle is imitation leather. That's something that we've seen from Lexus for a while rather than having standard leather in many of their models. It feels pretty believable at first, but it doesn't breathe quite as well as natural leather. We have perforations in the middle of the seat bottom and back cushions, but these seats are not actively ventilated in this particular trim, but that is available in other trims of the UX. Lexus definitely decided to play it safe when it came to the overall interior design. There aren't very many styling elements on the upper side of the door. We have some fairly plain sides right there. A lot of soft touch materials on the upper section, hard plastics on the lower part of the door, just as you'd expect in this particular segment. Moving from the doors on over to the dashboard, we find design elements from a number of recent Lexus products, and definitely the most recent Lexus ES350. We have an infotainment system that's mounted right there in the center of the dashboard, sort of like a tablet computer, very much like that Lexus ES model. And then we have a few different tiers to this dashboard structure. The upper section of the dashboard is made from soft touch materials. Then we have some after stitching right there in red to dress it up a little bit. As we see in other Lexus models, the infotainment system supports Apple CarPlay, but not Android Auto at this particular time, although we do have Amazon Alexa integration. There's also an analog clock that is not part of the LCD screen. That's actually a physical element over here on the left side. The infotainment system is controlled via this touchpad right here in the center console. This is my least favorite input method for a modern infotainment system. Although intuitive to use, like you actually know how to use this because you've probably used a laptop before, it actually takes an awful lot more time with your eyes off the road to actually get what you want out of this particular system, I find. I find this a little bit more difficult than the Lexus joystick controller, which is also not one of my favorites. We do have a few direct access buttons here, so a direct access button to the mapping interface right there. Menu takes us back to the main system menu. We have a back button and then a contextual pop-up button at the back. In this generation of the interface, we have some additional buttons right here around this wrist rest. We have a tune dial right there, a selector button, direct access button for radio, media right there, power and volume, that's actually a toggle right over there, and then there's another button over here on this side. Below the infotainment screen, we find the engine start-stop button, dual-zone automatic climate control, a single-slot optical disc player, and then the controls for the heated and optionally ventilated seats. You'd find those on this button bank if we had them. This is also where you'll find the button for the heated steering wheel. Below that, we have a place to store your smartphone. This also has a Qi wireless charging mat, and then there's a 12-volt power port that pops up out of this little area right here, but obviously not when a larger smartphone is located there. Behind that, we have two large cup holders. If I move the shifter out of the way, I was easily able to accommodate large takeout drinks there, and those larger drinks don't hit any of the buttons right there further up the dash. We have a pretty traditional console shifter. Drive is all the way back like that. There's a sport mode over to the left. We push away from the driver for up, pull towards the driver for down. There's that touch interface I showed you earlier. And then behind the shifter, we have an EV mode button and then an auto brake hold button. The center armrest is softly padded and it opens from either side. You can see there's a button on that side and then there's a button on this side as well. And this lid does not pinch your cords if you want to have something plugged into these USB ports and then stretch it on out there. We have two USB inputs, an auxiliary input, and there's definitely enough room here for you to store your smartphone away from prying eyes. There's also enough room there for wallets, that sort of thing down there in that storage compartment. F Sport trims get this full LCD instrument cluster. It has a physical ring that slides side to side and is coordinated with the software behind it. This screen is attractive, but it is notably smaller than some of the LCD instrument clusters we find in some of the competition, both standard and optional in those competitors. Once slid to the side, we get some expanded displays right there for things like our hybrid system, power flow. We also get vehicle settings. We can change things like how our active safety software behaves in this particular vehicle, the status of the vehicle's active safety systems, readouts from our infotainment system, and turn-by-turn navigation directions. We can then slide it across and then get a slightly different view right there with some analog readouts for our fuel level and engine temperature. We then get a subset of that information displayed right there in the middle of this gauge. This is a Power Eco charge gauge that we've seen in other Lexus models. If I toggle over to Sport, you'll notice it turns into a tachometer, and if I change over to Eco, it's a very similar display versus what we see in the normal mode. Zooming out from there, we find a round F Sport steering wheel with a large bottom spoke and aggressive sport grips up top. This is a nice thickly rimmed steering wheel, which I found very comfortable. On the back, we have shift paddles up on the right and then down on the left, and they do move with the wheel. On the left side, we have the buttons that control that multifunction LCD instrument cluster, dedicated phone button and voice command button, volume up, down over here on the left, track up, down over here on the right, along with a mode button. The rest of these buttons relate to the radar adaptive cruise control system and the lane keeping assistance system. Above the instrument cluster, we have a shape that mimics the spindle grille going on the front of the UX, and these two controls that stick out sort of like bolts on the side of Frankenstein's monster. This one right over here on the right is the drive mode selector. We rotate up and down for Sport, Eco, and then press in right there for normal mode. The one on the left side is the traction control enable and disable button. The first thing you'll notice about the Lexus UX out on the road, unfortunately, is the acceleration. This is significantly slower than the European competition. The model that we're driving here went from 0 to 60 in 9 seconds even. That actually puts this about 1/10 of a second below the manufacturer's claimed time for the regular non-hybrid version of the UX, which is supposed to be a little bit slower. Now that time actually surprised me a little bit because based on our initial experiences out at the launch event for this, the hybrid version felt notably faster than the non-hybrid version. I think it has to do with the overall amount of low-end torque that we get from this vehicle. And that actually is kind of a good thing for the hybrid. So even though this may actually end up being a little bit slower than the regular Lexus UX, it does actually feel a hair faster. We do get that more instant acceleration thanks to the massive amount of low-end torque from that electric motor. It has more of an electric car feel there at the low end. But then when the engine really starts spinning, you don't get that much more acceleration versus the regular non-hybrid model. Also a little bit on the long side is the overall stopping distance. This model went from 60 miles an hour back to 0 in 128 feet, which definitely puts this behind something like the BMW X1, X2, the Audi Q3, etc. Looking purely at the numbers, the UX actually manages to fall behind premium entries like the Buick Encore when it comes to overall acceleration and braking distances. Now when it comes to overall handling ability, I think this does beat the overall feel that we find in that Buick, but in terms of absolute grip, they're actually pretty close. This is not going to handle quite as well as the European entries in this group. The European entries are a little bit lighter, and they of course have wider tires either available or standard versus what we find here on the Lexus UX, especially when we're talking about this particular hybrid trim. The other thing you'll really notice when it comes to overall handling is that this vehicle cannot put as much power to the rear end as those alternatives from Europe can. Now, none of the options from Europe are rear-wheel drive biased anymore. The X1 is now front-wheel drive biased, but it can still send more power to the rear axle when it wants to, thanks to its mechanical all-wheel drive system. Now, the bright side for the added weight is that the overall drive in the UX, I think, is actually better than we find in pretty much any of the competition. So if you're looking for a more comfortable highway cruiser, this is definitely going to be it. And that even includes this F-Sport model, which is ostensibly the firmest version of the UX. Cabin noise is a little bit more pronounced in here, especially during acceleration, than most of the entries in this group, but overall it is still notably quieter than your average compact or subcompact crossover, at 71 decibels at 50 miles an hour. So when it comes to our overall cabin noise score, I'm going to give this an A-. This is notably quieter than something like a Mazda CX-3, but this is actually going to be louder than the average luxury entry in America. It's also worth noting that this hybrid system plays digital engine noises into the cabin. So if I were to put this into the sport mode, and then after we go around this corner, I'll floor it, and you can probably pick it up in the microphone here, we do get a lot of imitation engine noise into the cabin. And it doesn't necessarily feel that real versus exactly what the engine is doing. The area where the UX truly shines is overall fuel economy. We've been averaging nearly 41 miles per gallon in this vehicle over a week of mixed driving, even though it's only EPA rated for 39 miles per gallon. This is significantly faster than any other entry in this particular segment. Most of the competition might average 30 miles per gallon if you treated them very nicely, but if you drive them in a more spirited fashion, fuel economy is going to drop right down there around 20, perhaps 22 miles per gallon. But this Lexus UX, you'd actually be really hard pressed to drop below maybe 38 miles per gallon, even if you started driving this more aggressively. Out on the open highway, fuel economy is absolutely excellent in the high 30 mile per gallon range, and if you're just puttering around town, especially in slow and go traffic, then fuel economy will easily be over 40 miles per gallon. Like other Lexus and Toyota hybrids, this system does extremely well in slow and go traffic. Now, it is worth noting that although we don't see any hybrids at the moment, we do expect to see plug-in hybrids from a number of the European competitors, especially Volvo with the new XC40. Now, if you're looking for something that's a little bit more efficient than this, or something that will run on electricity only, then you should know that a lot of the European brands are working on plug-in hybrid or pure EV versions of their competitors to this model. Overall, the UX is a very competent crossover. It has a very solid feel out on the road. It actually feels a little bit larger and a little bit heavier than it really is. That's likely due to the overall weight of the hybrid system. Unfortunately, the UX does fall behind the mainline luxury competitors when it comes to overall acceleration, braking, and even the overall handling score. So you have to decide whether you're after something like this that's a little bit more relaxed, definitely high on the fuel economy, or whether you're looking for something that's perhaps a little bit more exciting to drive, like those European alternatives. For 2019, the UX starts at $32,000, making it one of the less expensive entries in this segment. Now, it's worth keeping in mind that we don't find all the same kind of standard feature content in the UX that we find in many of the competitors, and of course it is by far the slowest entry in terms of overall 0 to 60 time. If you're looking for all-wheel drive, you won't find it in a traditional sense in the UX. Instead, we have that electric all-wheel drive system. And it is important to remember that that's not going to be as capable as the mechanical all-wheel drive systems we find in the competition. It should be just fine for overall snow traction and improving wet weather traction, but because we only get about 7 horsepower to the rear axle, the system overall is going to behave very much like the Toyota Prius all-wheel drive system rather than the Lexus NX all-wheel drive system. Fortunately, the bump up from the base UX into the UX all-wheel drive hybrid is actually a fairly small jump. It's $2,000. You'll easily recover that in the lifetime of the vehicle in terms of overall fuel costs. The other thing you'll notice on this chart in front of you is that there is no leather upholstery option here. We don't actually get that at all in the UX. It's just imitation leather in this particular model, and that may be a pro for some, and that may be a con for others. Key selling points for the UX would be the overall reliability, the overall fuel economy, especially in the hybrid model, and of course all of the active safety systems which are standard on the UX and are optional on basically every one of its competitors. While some of the European entries may offer additional active safety systems that we don't see available in the UX, none of them offer what we see standard in that base UX model. Let's tackle the toughest competitor first, the BMW X1. It's the 900-pound gorilla in this segment because it is by far the best seller, and with very good reason. At $34,950, it is more expensive than the base UX, but we also get more standard feature content and most notably more power. We also get a more practical interior. The X1 has one of the largest and most usable interiors in this particular segment. And the BMW also has improved driving dynamics versus the UX. Now, the delta between the BMW and front-wheel drive competitors is not as large as it once was because, of course, the BMW is now front-wheel drive as well. But on the flip side, that front-wheel drive change has actually given us an absolutely enormous cargo area in the back of the X1. It's easily the largest in this segment and actually rivals some of the next category up. Next up, we have the Volvo XC40, a longtime favorite here at Alex on Autos. The XC40 is a little bit more affordable than the BMW, but it is still more expensive than the UX. It comes with more power standard and better performance than we find in the Lexus, and of course a real mechanical all-wheel drive system like we find in the X1. The big differentiator between the XC40 and the UX, in my opinion, is style, both on the inside and on the outside. I really find the XC40 very, very attractive. Personally, I think that the X2 and the XC40 are the most beautiful entries in this segment at the moment. The upright nature of the XC40 also has a practical side because it has a very, very large and accommodating interior relative to the overall size of the vehicle. The UX is fairly large in this segment, but it doesn't actually feel like that on the inside. It tends to feel a little bit more cramped because of its overall design. Even though the Volvo tops out a little bit higher than the Lexus UX, just under $48,000, we find tons of feature content in that model that we just don't find available at any price in the Lexus. We get a larger configurable LCD instrument cluster, we get an adaptive suspension system, more adjustable seats, more comfortable seats, etc., and of course leather upholstery and real wood trim on the inside, all these things that we don't find in that base Lexus model. Continuing down the ladder in terms of overall base price, we next up have the Audi Q3. The Q3 we've only driven for a short while, but we should have a full review on very soon. Audi has been very aggressive with their base price in the Q3, and to get there they have used an older 6-speed automatic, which actually bums me out just a little bit with that particular model. But everything that we've loved about the Q3 is still here. It still handles absolutely excellently. The Q3 is definitely one of the best handling entries in this segment. Overall fuel economy is still respectable, and even though the engine doesn't produce as much power as some of the European options, it is still notably faster than the Lexus UX. On the downside, the Q3's interior can feel a little bit austere. So depending on exactly what you're looking for, it may not be the best pick if you're looking for something that's a little bit more warm and inviting. This is an area where the UX actually does fairly well. We have a different number of color options available inside the UX, including an option with blue stitched pleather on the dashboard. I find that particular model quite attractive. And the Q3 is really just a variation on the shades of black. That moves us along to the least expensive competitor in this segment, the Infiniti QX30. The QX30 starts just over $30,000, making it an absolutely excellent deal and notably less expensive than the Lexus UX. That helps compensate for the fact that we don't find the same kind of active safety features in the Infiniti standard that we do in the Lexus. Now, sort of like the UX, the QX30 comes across more as hatchback that's been raised up a little bit or SUV-ified than rather a true crossover like the BMW X1 appears these days. That's quite logical because the QX30 really does start out as a hatchback. In other world markets, what we see as the base QX30 is sold as a Q30 hatchback, and then the QX30 is the model that's been jacked up in terms of overall ride height. But here in the US, just to confuse us all, they put the QX30 label on everything. It's best to probably think of the QX30 sort of as the luxury GTI. It really focuses on overall driving dynamics, and it has decent acceleration as well. That's quite logical because the QX30 is the byproduct of a Mercedes and Nissan alliance with one another in developing some small vehicles. What Infiniti did was they took a Mercedes GLA, they took some Infiniti parts, they threw them in a blender, and then poured out a QX30. So underneath the skin, it is Mercedes. We have a Mercedes-designed transmission, Mercedes-designed engine. Of course, the engine is built in a Nissan factory. We have a Nissan infotainment system, Mercedes-Benz seat frames, etc. It's just really a hodgepodge of these two things together. Overall interior room is not quite as generous as some of the European options, but there are definitely some reasons that you might want to get the QX30. The transmission design is a Mercedes design, but Infiniti has really smoothed out the edges on that transmission shifting, so it actually tends to drive a little bit more premium feeling than the Mercedes GLA. Now we have to answer the question, what would I buy if my own money were on the line? This may actually surprise you, but I would be torn between the XC40 and the BMW X2. If I had a little bit more cash on my hands, I would take the X2 with the new 300 horsepower engine option, but if I was trying to be a little bit more practical, a little bit more pragmatic, the XC40 is just an easy win here. It's a great option. The handling is absolutely excellent in terms of overall grip and in terms of overall feel. Acceleration is second only to that 300 horsepower BMW value option. It's well priced, we get a ton of standard feature content, and I also think it's a very attractive vehicle. When pitted against the Lexus UX, there are some reasons that you might want to buy the Lexus UX, but they tend to be very pragmatic reasons: reliability, fuel economy, the standard active safety, etc. But when you start crunching the other numbers and you start looking at roominess on the inside, comfort level on the inside, the ability to accommodate adults in the back seat, etc., the UX honestly falls behind the rest of the competition, and it's just not as much fun out on the road. So if my money were on the line, I would probably place it last in this particular segment at the moment. Be sure and let me know what you think about that down there in the comments section below. If you haven't already done so, hit that subscribe button down there at the bottom of your screen. You'll be updated on this little subscriber board here on my desk. Click up there to the top of your screen if you want to support this channel. That'll take you over to patreon.com. Head over to facebook.com/AlexNautis so you can see us over there as well. I'll see you next week.